right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. We are racing towards the end of the school year. I know a lot of classes in the U.S. have already started to pack it in for the summer, but many classrooms here in Canada, the U.K., parts of the U.S. as well will go right until the end of the month, and we still have lots of action coming your way before the school year comes to an end. In fact, today is a jam-packed day. So if any teachers out there want to just chill and hang out with us for the day, we've got some live action from Africa coming up, from Zambia, with one of our good friends, Joe Cutler. That's at 11 o'clock today. At 2 o'clock, we'll be diving into the Mesophotic region of the ocean and looking at the biodiversity of coral and marine life in one of the least explored regions of our planet. And then what we're going to get up to today is a little Everest action. We actually have two events today. This one right now, and then another one coming up at 1 p.m. Eastern. So for the teachers who registered, we sent out a link to Everest VR, the quest. And you have had a chance to watch it with your classrooms or your students to watch it at home. It is just an amazing film that takes you on an experience to Everest like nothing I've ever experienced, because I sure haven't been to base camp or made my way up to the summit of Everest. So it's amazing how technology can bring the world to us, and we're able to do these incredible things with classrooms. So joining us today will be Alex Harz. He's the creator, the host, and camera operator through this incredible expedition. And I believe the plan is that this will be a series continuing to different exciting places around the world over the next few years. So hopefully we have lots of opportunities to connect and take students places with Alex. So Alex is joining us in Colorado today. I'm going to reach backstage and pull him in here with us. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Fine. How you doing today, Joe?
Yeah, good. Alex, it's so great to have you live with us today. This is one of the most amazing parts of the planet. You being a member of the Explorers Club as well. It's one of our famous firsts, the first to Everest. Hillary, one of the members of the club, and Tenzing, his Sherpa, were the first to get up there. So that's one of our famous firsts. So it's really great to have you with us today. Extra special.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to be here. And yeah, May 29th, 1953 will always be a famous day, not only for Mount Everest, but for the country of Nepal. And of course, for the Explorers Club, as you mentioned, because Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were the first to summit it. And so, yeah, it's an absolute fascinating place indeed.
All right. Well, a lot of the students have had a chance to tune in. In fact, we've got a bunch of camera classrooms backstage. I'm going to just put them on stage right now so they can give a big wave so we can see some of the backstage crew hanging out with us. There they are. We're going to bring them in a little bit later for some Q&A action. We also have a bunch of classrooms tuning in via YouTube saying hi. So Ms. Steinhoff's class in Guelph, Ontario saying hi. Who else do we have here? We've got Peel Elementary Virtual School, grade 7s. We've got the grade 5 Water Rockers hanging out with us, I believe, in Guelph. We've got some grade 8s in Ottawa. So we've got a good crew already here saying hi. So that's pretty cool. Alex, I think the best place to start because you shared some great behind the scenes pictures and videos we're going to dive into, but where did the idea for this come from?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Joe. Ironically, it was something that stumbled across me, and it started essentially when I was 14 years old. I played competitive soccer growing up in Omaha, Nebraska at that time. And I came back home from a long, lengthy soccer practice like I had every day, a couple hours. And I was sitting on the floor, leaning against my couch, and I was watching TV, and I saw something about Mount Everest. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to climb that mountain. Well, out of sight, out of mind for the rest of the time that I lived in Omaha, Nebraska. I didn't think about it much thereafter. Then I moved to Denver, Colorado, where I am today. And again, out of sight, out of mind for quite some time until one day I'm sitting on my couch in Denver, watching some random daytime television, absolutely nothing to do with climbing or mountaineering. But for some weird reason, that recollection of when I was a 14-year-old kid, promising to myself that I would climb Everest one day, popped back into my head. And I said to myself, okay, if you can't keep a word to yourself, Alex, how can I honor my commitments to anyone else? So the next day I started. I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't into mountaineering. I was a traditional athlete, playing soccer and basketball and those kind of things. But I said, all right, I'm going to try to make this promise that I gave to myself a reality. And so that happened to be in the wintertime. So here in Colorado, we have these peaks known as 14ers, which are 53 mountains above 14,000 feet. So it was the middle of January, and I went and put on my snowboarding gear, and I tried to make my way up the first 14er I could find. And it was absolutely miserable. I was post-holing up to my chest, up to my waist, and so on, overweighted with the wrong amount of equipment on. But I made it to the top. And I did a few more of those. And then I realized, okay, if I really want to try to make it to Mount Everest and fulfill this promise that I gave myself, I need to be more serious about the training itself of what it takes to climb mountains, mountaineering, and so on. And so I got into mountaineering classes, and I started learning about glacier travel, wilderness survival, rock climbing, and all these different things that you use on Mount Everest. And I worked my way over this long process to make it to Mount Everest. So I climbed Mount Rainier out in Washington State. I went up to Alaska, climbed Denali. I went down to South America and climbed the highest mountain down there, known as Aconcagua. And then eventually I had a radio show at the time, and I said to myself, okay, I can't just continue to make this process of trying to fulfill my dream to do it just for myself. I have to do something bigger with it. And so I stopped my radio show and I started the Quest series. And so the Quest series was born essentially out of that. And it's this unique series to take, global audiences around the world to these, iconic locations, rarely seen locations oftentimes, to tell amazing stories about these amazing locations that a lot of people might not have a chance to see. And so the newest films of the series, and what you mentioned earlier, Joe, are the Quest Everest documentary. That's a 97-minute documentary that's now out. And the Quest Everest VR real-life virtual reality documentary, which set out to climb Mount Everest and deeper understand the mountain and to reveal the amazing culture, history, and nature of the country of Nepal. And so that's what we did. And I'm humbly honored to have been able to climb Mount Everest and be able to share my experiences today with everyone in front of us.
All right. Well, in just a moment, I'm going to share some photos and videos that we'll talk about. I do want to do a few more shout outs. We've got Kitchener, Ontario, grade 4 saying hey. We've got Miss Zamani's 7th grader saying hi as well. So that's very cool. Alex, it's not like you can just show up in Nepal and climb Everest. Can you tell us a little bit about, what you have to do to prepare beforehand, to get the permissions and just to get there in the first place?
Yeah, great question, Joe. It takes years. It takes years of preparation. Like I said, you have to start climbing some of these other mountains in order to figure out the techniques to figure out, how do I best approach climbing a mountain and to work your way up to higher altitude. The thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that in order to make it to 29,032 feet, which is the summit of Everest, or 8849 in meters, it's a genetic thing, meaning you have the ability to acclimatize to extreme high altitude or not. So unfortunately, you have to choose your parents wisely. And that's something you obviously can't do. So you don't know until you go, and oftentimes you have to just work your way up higher and higher and see how your body performs at those altitudes. So with regards to Everest itself, a year leading out before I went to Mount Everest, I started training 7 days a week. So I was training 2 to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week with no exceptions. And I had a very regimented routine, which every one of those 7 days meant for me to prepare physically, as well as building up my mental toughness to, the suffering that ultimately takes place when you go to a place like Mount Everest. And then you have to get permits as well. So in order to get to climb Mount Everest, you have to register with the country of Nepal. It's an expensive permit. Right now, it costs $11,000 just to get the permit to have that opportunity to try to climb the mountain. But that fee is going to be increased to $15,000. So it's getting more expensive. So then you also have to then go with a team. So you can't just show up, like you say, in Nepal, say, hey, I want to climb Mount Everest. No, you have to go with a team that then is registered with the government, that's able to go to Mount Everest. And then that's how you then get onto these expeditions. And the expeditions usually take, about a month and a half, 2 months. Our expedition took 52 days. Now, I was in Nepal for 63 days because I was filming other stuff, the cultural stuff and the history and the beautiful scenery that I mentioned earlier, which is what the quest is all about. But the actual expedition itself took 52 days. And so, yeah, you do 9 days of trekking to Everest Base Camp. Once you get to Everest Base Camp, it took 43 days from base camp to the summit and back down.
All right, I'm gonna get some photos in here. There we go. Let's go on a little journey. You have a little kind of behind the scenes photo journey. There's 2 videos mixed in as well. When you want me to change a slide, Alex, just let me know, and let's kind of trek up there together.
That sounds perfect. So this is me holding the camera and down in Kathmandu, Nepal, and this is a temple called Pashupatinath Temple, and it's the oldest temple in Nepal. It's 3,000 years old, and it's a Hindu temple. So Hindus will go there and worship, and as you can see in the background, you see the smoke. Well, that smoke is actually burning bodies. People are being cremated there, and that temple is open 24 hours a day for loved ones to come and take their deceased relatives there if they'd like to cremate them, and to sweep their ashes into that river, which is in front of it, called the Bagmati River. And it's a very sacred and holy river for Nepalese Hindus because that Bagmati River connects to the Ganges River, which is the most sacred river in the world if you are a Hindu believer. And so, yeah, it's a very fascinating place. And we were there for about 8 hours filming. And so, yeah, there's me with a camera over my shoulder. So if you go to the next shot, Joe, that is a person that I interviewed. He's known as a Hindu sadhu. A sadhu is a holy wise man in the Hindu religion. And I sat down and I interviewed all 3 of those people that you see there with the face paint on. And they are actually essentially like what we would have, for example, in the West, if you're into Christianity, that'd be similar to a priest. And so they are the wise men that are able to disseminate some of the lore of the Hindu religion. And they actually live there on the ground. So they have denounced all worldly possessions. They have no homes, and they actually live there at the Pashupatinath temple, and they devote themselves to the religion. If you go to the next slide, we are now working our way up into the Khumbu Valley, and the Khumbu Valley is where Mount Everest sits. So at the end of the Khumbu Valley, it's actually a dead end that separates Nepal from Tibet or Nepal from China, is where Mount Everest is. And so here we're starting the trek to get to Everest Base Camp, that 9-day trek that I mentioned earlier. And there are no roads that lead to Mount Everest. So everything that goes to Everest Base Camp either has to be carried by a human being, or has to be carried by a helicopter, or by an animal. In this case, it's a yak. And so yaks are some of the most common animals up in the Khumbu Valley to carry gear and supplies to Everest Base Camp because of their ability to adjust and survive very well at high altitude, going all the way up to 17,500 feet, which is where Everest Base Camp is. And here is a yak crossing one of the river bridges that we had to cross in order to make our way towards base camp. All right, the next slide. All right, and this is the village known as Namche Bazaar. And Namche Bazaar is essentially the de facto Sherpa capital in the Khumbu Valley. And what I mean by Sherpa, the Sherpa are actually people. It's an ethnic group that came over from eastern Tibet or the western part of China about 650 years ago, and they settled in the Khumbu Valley, and that's where they ended up. And this is kind of their biggest village in the valley, and so they call it the de facto capital of the Sherpa people, and that's Namche Bazaar. And as you can see, those buildings are all carved into the side of the mountain. Of course, the terrain there is quite rugged, and so what they do is they terrace farm up there, and they build their housing into the side of the hills. Go to the next slide. All right, that is a beautiful peak that's right outside of Namche Bazaar, known as Tamserku, or the 9 peaks in the Sherpa language. And as you can see there, you see those flags, those different colored flags. Those are Tibetan prayer flags. And so the Sherpa people, they're primarily Buddhist, but they mix their Buddhist belief with Bon mysticism that they brought with them from Tibet when they came and settled in the Khumbu Valley. And those 5 different colored flags represent the 5 elements within Bon mysticism. and also within the Tibetan Buddhism that they follow. And each one of those flags will have different prayers on it or mantras that then are blown in the wind and are then spread through the air to people below, and that as far as the air can travel to touch those people. So it's blessings essentially that are being spread by those different flags. And the colors represent, so the red is fire, the green is actually water, the blue there is the sky or the air, and then the white is the actual air itself, and then you have the yellow, which represents, if I'm not mistaken, we talked about the green, which is the water, the yellow is the earth. So those are the 5 different colors, and that's what they represent in the elements. All right, let's click on to the next one. All right, that is the Mount Everest Massive. So what we did is when we got to the second to last day on our 9-day trek to base camp, we climbed this neighboring peak known as Kalapatar. And from Kalapatar, you can look out over towards Mount Everest and down into Everest Base Camp, which you see that white glacier at the bottom is actually the Khumbu Glacier. And that's the highest glacier in the world. And that's where Mount Everest Base Camp sits. And that's where we then have our basically our operations and set up our tents for 43 days to try to climb the mountain that's in the background, and that is Mount Everest. The mountain in the foreground, the taller one in the foreground, that's Mount Nuptse. And then you see another peak there that's protruding out in front of Mount Everest, and that's actually part of Mount Everest itself, known as the West Shoulder. And what we're doing is we're going down to that white piece of glacier to set up, and that's where we stage our climbs from. Go on to the next slide. That's Everest Base Camp itself. And essentially, that's an international tent city. So you have people from all across the world that try to come to Mount Everest and try to climb the mountain. And so you have countries, people from representing almost every country in the world that try to attempt to climb Everest. And that's about a 1-mile long city of tents that sit on that Khumbu Glacier, which is again the highest glacier in the world, and it moves at about 3 to 6 feet downhill a day. So where our tents are actually moving underneath our feet. So throughout those 43 days that we're sitting on that Khumbu Glacier trying to work our way up and down the mountain to try to make it to the top, we actually have to adjust our tents multiple times as the glacier is moving downhill. Okay, so move to the next slide. That is our team there engaging in a puja ceremony. So a puja ceremony is, again, the Sherpa people that live in the Khumbu Valley. They do these religious ceremonies known as pujas, which is asking for the gods for permission to allow us to climb the mountain. And specifically, the god that we're asking to find permission from is Choma or Choma Mia Lungsama, which means goddess mother of the earth or goddess mother of the world. And what we have in the West, for example, when we say, oh, Mother Earth, we have this kind of understanding, oh, is it the sky? Is it the actual ground itself? No, for the Sherpa people themselves, it's actually Mount Everest. So they refer to Chomolungma, or goddess mother of the world, is Mount Everest. So in order to get permission and safe passage to climb Mount Everest, everybody that goes to Everest Base Camp and ultimately tries to work their way up the mountain has to go through one of these ceremonies known as a puja ceremony, where we ask for blessing and safe passage to climb the mountain. And that is our team right there being engaged in the puja ceremony. Okay, next slide. That is the Khumbu Icefall, which is the start of essentially where we make the climb up the mountain, and that's part of the Khumbu Glacier. Like we said, that's the highest glacier in the world, and those are big blocks of ice and big cracks known as crevasses that can be, bottomless, hundreds of feet deep. And those blocks of ice themselves, it's hard to tell in this photo because of the scale of how massive everything is on Mount Everest, but they can be the size of buildings, office buildings, or cars, and they're constantly moving between 3 to 6 feet downhill every day. And so they're constantly shifting and they're falling over like Jenga blocks, and the crevasses will get bigger as the season goes along. And so every time that we make our way through that ice fall in order to slowly make our way up to the top of Mount Everest, the route consistently changes because of the ice itself shifting. And that's what it looks like when you go into the ice fall. Next slide. That's our team actually climbing in the ice fall. So you can see us going up those blocks of ice, and we're tied into ropes trying to make our way through the ice fall in order to get to the first campsite above base camp known as Camp 1. Next slide. All right, now we've made it to the top of the ice fall, and of course, in order to cross through the ice fall and to the rest of the mountain, to the base of Everest itself, we have to try to make it through over these crevasses that I mentioned, which can be bottomless. I mean, all you see is black as you look down, and in order to get across those crevasses, you have to use ladders. And in this case, we had two ladders tied together by essentially fishing twine that holds them together. Sometimes it could be as long as 5 ladders tied together, and they move up and down several inches to several feet depending on how long they are as you cross those ladders. And the only way you can cross those ladders is by stepping on the different rungs of the ladders by putting your toes and your feet, the back of your feet onto the rungs of those ladders, and you slowly work your way methodically across the ladder to get to the other side. Next slide.
All right, we've got our first video clip coming up. So
That's right.
here it comes, and you should see it now. Yeah, those ladders look like fun, Alex.
Yep, and that's me climbing across the ladder. And the clinking of the noise is actually the metal spikes at the bottom of the boots, which are called crampons, that are touching the aluminum rungs of the ladder. And what's interesting is you only have about an inch on the front of your boot and an inch on the back of the boot, which are the spikes themselves that make contact to those rungs. So you have to be very precise to where you put your feet in order to cross those ladders. Go to the next slide.
Let's get the presentation back up. There we go. And next slide.
All right, and that is us climbing one of those crevasse walls, and that's about a 65-foot wall that we're climbing. That's one of my teammates, Golner Tombat from Turkey, and we're climbing up that wall. So again, those crevasses go up and down and up and down across these ice fields as we work our way up the mountain, and that is Golner climbing up one of those crevasse walls. Next slide. All right, and we're working our way up and up, higher up the mountain, and that is looking at the Lhotse Face. And the Lhotse Face is a part of the climb that's 5,000 feet tall wall of ice that separates essentially Camp 2 from Camp 4. And in order to get to Camp 4, which is the highest camp on Mount Everest and the last place that you leave your tent from in order to try to make it to the summit, you have to climb this 5,000-foot wall of ice that you see in front of you. And so you then work your way from Camp 2 up to Camp 3 that is cut into that wall of ice at 23,500, 23,600 feet is kind of where this little ledge is. And that's where you put your tent in to try to spend the night as you work your way towards Camp 4. Now, ironically, we had to actually go to Camp 3 twice because, again, like I said, you just don't go up the mountain one time. Over the course of 43 days, you work your way slowly up and back down and then up and back down in order to acclimatize to that increasingly higher altitude. And what that means is you have to essentially shock your body into producing more red blood cells so you can generate the ability to carry more oxygen at those extreme altitudes in order to survive. So you work your way up the mountain, you come back down, you work your way up the mountain a little bit higher the next time, you come all the way back down. And then the last time you try to make your way to the summit because you can't acclimatize any higher than 23,500 or 23,600 feet. So it makes no sense to go any higher until you go for the summit. And that, again, that Camp 3 sits on the Lhotse Face there at 23,500 feet. And then eventually you have to work your way up to try to make it to Camp 4. And that is the next slide. And there's Camp 4, and that is at 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters, and that is the last place that you will sit in a tent before you go to that summit point that you can see in front of you, and that is the top of Mount Everest out there in front of you, which is another 3,000 feet above you, and yeah, that's where you leave from on the next slide, which is in the middle of the night. So to make it to the summit of Everest, when you leave Camp 4, you leave around midnight or sometime in the middle of the evening, because the idea is you want to try to make it to the top of Everest and back down to those tents that you saw in Camp 4 before it gets dark again. So you want to leave in the middle of the night to then climb up through the following morning as the sun rises, try to make it to the summit sometime in the late morning or early afternoon, and then all the way back down to those tents at Camp 4 before sundown again. Next slide.
All right, we have our second video coming our way. You should see it now.
Yes, and that is me climbing, rock climbing essentially at about 28,300 feet below the south summit of Everest. And so I am connected into a rope with a device that is moving up and down like this, known as a Jumar. And it's a one-way device, so the teeth of that Jumar will go up, but then it grabs so it doesn't let me slide back down. And you're connected into that, and that assists you essentially climbing this rock face here that I'm climbing, but it also protects you from if you were to fall, if you were to make a bad foot placement. As you can see in that clip, I am looking down at my feet the whole time in order to make sure that my little crampons, my little spikes on the bottom of my boot are getting enough traction on that rock that you see in front of you. And so, yeah, that is us climbing up the southeast ridge there. Next slide. And there we are now nearing the summit slope above that ridge there, that rock section, and above the south summit and above the famous Hillary Step. And now we're looking back towards where we started. And in the distance, you can see a little blue lake, and you can see the Khumbu Glacier at the bottom, all the way at the bottom where the brown starts. Well, that's where base camp is. And so that's where we started many days earlier in order to make our way up to this point, which is the final summit slope towards the top of the world. Next slide. And that is me on the summit of Mount Everest, taking a selfie here. And as you can see the curve of the Earth there from 29,032 feet or 8,849 meters. And so, yeah, that is what the top of the Earth looks like from my perspective looking into the camera. And if you go to the last slide, that's actually the top of Mount Everest there. So that's the little platform. That's the summit of Everest. And it's about the size of 2 ping pong tables put together. And that's what the top of the world looks like. And you can see about 200 miles, as far as I can see, into China or Tibet, 200 miles into India, and 200 miles into Nepal in a 360-degree view from the top of the world.
All right. Perfect, Alex. What a view. Yeah, pretty special to get up there. And the whole time bringing 360 cameras with you to be able to bring this experience back that the students were able to watch over the course of the last couple of weeks. Alex, we are going to get into Q&A action, which I know is the part that students have been itching to get to. So thanks for taking us from, Nepal through base camp and right to the summit of Everest. What we're also going to do while we take our first questions, we're going to play Kahoot as well. So while you were presenting, I pulled together a really quick Kahoot quiz, which I'm going to load onto my screen right now. As students are joining, we'll start with the questions, we'll play some Kahoot, and we'll finish with questions. So you should see this coming up on your screen right about now. If you want to play along with us, you need to go to kahoot.it, kahoot.it, and they're going to ask you for a PIN number. Today's PIN is 234003. 234003. One more answers to him or her. If you're joining from home, scan the QR code with your phone or tablet. If you can't join with technology, no big deal. You can still play along and see how you do. But let's get some questions while students are joining us backstage. Fourth graders. Here, hey, fourth graders, how are we doing?
Oh, good. Sorry, Joe. Raymond has a question here.
What was the scariest part of climbing Mount Everest?
Boy, that's a great question, Raymond. There's quite a few points that are quite scary. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're trying to convince yourself that you're not so scared. But I would say consistently, the scariest part of the mountain is probably the Khumbu Icefall because of all the crevasses and all the big blocks of ice that can fall over and the avalanches that come down and hit the ice fall all the time. That puts you on guard quite a bit. But most of the mountain itself, once you step into the Khumbu Icefall, can be quite scary. But I was also a little bit lucky because I was filming a lot of the time. So that helped me focus on what I was doing and maybe not so much about how scary everything was in front of me.
All right. Great question to start us off. Let's grab Mr. Pool's 6th graders. And I'll just remind our classes on YouTube, don't be shy and start sending your questions via the chat as well. But Mr. Pool's crew, do we have a question? Oh, that sounds like a fire alarm. Okay, so Mr. Pool's class may be outside right now. We'll check in with them in a moment. Let's try our 3-4s in North Bay, Ontario. See if they have a question for us. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Preet, and my question was, how did it feel in a suit, like in a climbing gear?
Great question. Yeah, you have to wear multiple different kinds of clothing depending on where you are on the mountain. And actually, that suit that you're talking about, this one right here, is a negative 40 below zero down suit. And what that allows you to do essentially is to deal with the tremendous amount of cold that can arise on Mount Everest. So without this suit, it would be pretty much impossible to make it to the top of Mount Everest. So it's like a big sleeping bag that you're wearing. As you go higher and higher, you depend on more of those kind of clothing. And another piece of equipment that relates to that suit is this boot right here. And this is a negative 60 below zero boot. And this is the boot that you wear when you're climbing most of the time up Everest. But it's very important in order to keep your toes warm. And also, it's how you attach the spikes that you see right here, known as crampons, that allow you to dig in the ice. Because without these, there's no way you're going to get to the top of Mount Everest.
All right. Very cool. Thanks, Preet. And yeah, you definitely want to have all your toes when you get back down from Everest. So those boots are pretty darn important.
That's
okay,
right.
I'll grab one from YouTube. Then we're going to play Kahoot. Mrs. Steinhoff's class wants to know the weight of your gear that you brought up with you. How much did it weigh?
You know, that's another great question. That varied depending on where I was on the mountain, because I was also carrying camera gear for filming. So what we do, as we were talking about moving up and down the mountain multiple times before you go for the summit, you're moving also equipment up to the higher camps. So sometimes I'd be carrying more weight. For example, when I had to carry my sleeping bag and this down suit that I wasn't wearing all the time, but I was wearing this for the attempt for the summit. As we got higher to the mountain, I had to carry that to one of the lower camps and other gear along the way. So sometimes I could have been carrying 45 pounds or so, maybe 50 pounds, sometimes as little as 25 or 30 pounds. So it just depends on where I was on the mountain.
All right. Well, I think we're ready for some Kahoot. So I'm going to get it back onto the screen and we're going to hit start. So we have 4 questions today, some true or false, some multiple choice. The quicker you get those right answers in, the more points you're going to get. So let's get started. First question coming your way. How tall is Everest? So we talked, as it's mentioned a couple times. Is it 2,354 meters? Is it 5,000 meters? Is it 8,849 meters? Or is it, oops, that last one should be 10,000 meters. Or you can say 1,000 meters. So what do you think it is? 2,354, 5,000, 8,849, or 10,000 meters? You've got about 9 seconds to lock in your answer. All right. All right, good job, crew. Most students went with 8,849 meters. There are 14 peaks that pass 8,000 meters, and Everest is one of them. Alex, do you have plans for any of the other 14 summits?
Possibly, if it relates to the story of the quest. So again, the quest is, revolved around these unique stories from some of these amazing places in the world. And if we can tell a very cool historical and cultural story relating to those peaks, then yes, maybe. Otherwise, maybe not.
All right. Inspired Urchin is in first place. We go to another one here. This is a multi-select, so you have to pick all the ones that apply. Which mountains has Alex climbed? So he talked about a few of them. Everest. I'm going to mess up the name. Aconcagua, is that right? Close?
Correct.
All right. Denali and Mount Vinson. So which ones are you going to click? He mentioned several mountains that he's climbed, and he didn't mention one of those there. So click all of the ones that we know Alex has climbed. So it's a multi-select. You need several to have the right answers here. You've got about 3 seconds. All right. So Everest, obviously, we got that one. That was pretty easy. Alex talked about the highest summit in Aconcagua in South America, and then Denali. But Mount Vinson, the highest summit in Antarctica. There we go. That was the one we didn't talk about today.
Well, ironically, Joe, that's one that's on my list because
go.
one of the quests is looking to go to Antarctica. So if we go down there, then we'll try to climb Mount Vinson as well.
All right. Let's see. Knowing Squid has taken that spot. We got another true or false coming your way. Best way to get to Everest Base Camp is just to take the road. What do you guys think? Get to Everest Base Camp. The best way to get there is just to take the road. Is that true or is that false? And I see a message from Mr. Pool's 6-7 class. They're back from the fire drill. We could hear it. We joined your class and we could hear the fire alarm. So we knew you guys were out. I'm going to come visit you in just a moment. There we go. False. There is no road that leads to Everest. You've got to trek, take your yaks along to carry some gear, and trek your way to Everest Base Camp. Knowing Squid, holding on for 2 questions. Green prayer flags. They represent water. Is that true or is that false? Green prayer flags represent water. True or false? Got a few more seconds to lock something in. We know there's 5 colors. We know they represent the elements. All right, good job, crew. That's absolutely true. My guess, if I had to just guess, I would have guessed Earth, but I think we learned that yellow represents Earth on the prayer flags.
That's correct, Joe. And the reason why green is because the water up there, the mineral content of the water from runoff from the glacier, it actually looks green. So it makes sense that, if you're in those high altitudes, that green is the color of water that you identify with.
All right. Well, the Proud Cheetah takes 3rd place, the Knowing Squid to 2nd, and the Cute Puffin sneaking in at the last minute and taking that top spot. So big shout out to our classrooms. Thanks for playing Kahoot. I'm going to turn that music off. And we're going to go right to Mr. Pool's crew, who was out for the fire alarm. We could hear the fire alarm, so we figured that's what was happening. But we got you now, so we'd love an Everest question or 2.
Okay, who was one of the people who had their hand up that asked a question this morning that wants to ask it on camera? Cooper, come on up. This is Cooper.
All right. Hey, Cooper.
Hi, Cooper.
Hi. How many people should you have with you to climb Mount Everest?
Oh, that's a great question. There's no real answer of how many people you have to have, but you can't go by yourself. That is the one answer that does hold true. So you can't just go by yourself. You have to have, for each climber, there has to be at least one support climber with you. Now, that's a law or a rule that the Nepalese government has put in place. So you can no longer just go by yourself and try to make it up there. But typically the teams are anywhere with all the support people, the cooks and the climbers and the people that help go up the mountain with you, can be anywhere from, let's say, 10 to 20 people. That constitutes everybody that you live with for 52 days trying to make it to the top of the world, to as big as a couple hundred people. So the largest teams are sometimes 100 people, but the smallest teams would probably be around 8 people, and that would include all the support staff. In my case, we had 3 other climbers that were going with me for the summit. So we had the expedition leader, who was my friend Ryan Waters, and then we had Golnar Tombat from Turkey, a guy named Gilberto Ton from Brazil, and a man named Erlen Ness from Norway. And then we had 4 other Sherpa support climbers that were with us to try to make it to the top. And then our cooking staff, our base camp staff, and our Camp 2 staff that were there as well to assist to try to help us get to the top of the world.
All right, let's snag a second one if you got it before we jump to another class. I think we'll go to Miss N's 5th graders next.
Gage, why don't you come on up? And then I don't know if there's any chance to show the picture again, because we were outside on a fire drill when you got to the summit. So I'm assuming there was a great photo we missed.
I'll share the summit photo. I still have it pulled up on my screen.
Okay, perfect. Come on up, Gage.
Like how much did it cost, like in total, like after plane tickets and stuff, to like get the rentals, the guides, the the Sherpas and stuff? How much did it cost to climb Mount Everest?
Yeah, great question. And that's another one of those variable questions. In my case, I was also filming, so I had production costs for the actual filming of the Quest Everest documentary and the Quest Everest VR real life virtual reality documentary. So I had equipment and camera people and all that other kind of stuff that I had to pay for. But just the climb itself, the cheapest that it would cost is about $35,000. Is about the cheapest American dollars that you can make it to Everest, and it can go all the way up to about $200,000 to $250,000, depending on if you want a private climb with multiple Sherpas, and a lot of different amenities to try to make things a little bit more comfortable for you. But yeah, anywhere between 35,000 and I'd say 100,000 in that range is about typical of what climbers would pay to try to climb Mount Everest.
All right. So while Alex was sharing there, I put up a couple summit shots. So you saw the summit shot, and then here's Alex up here taking a selfie up on the summit. And as you look carefully, you can see the curvature of the Earth, which is pretty darn cool. All right. Thanks, 6'7". We'll try to visit maybe for a follow-up. But I promised we'd go to Miss N's grade 5s next. If you want to unmute, we're ready for you.
Hi, amazing. So we had our friend Terry want to know, if you could, would you climb Everest again?
Great question. And people ask me that all the time. The answer is no, but I would maybe do it again if it was for a great cause, if it was for a great charity, something where I could benefit a lot of people directly, then I'd be willing to risk my life again to climb the mountain possibly. But otherwise, just to climb the mountain, to climb it again, the answer is no on that side of things.
All right. You have one more there for us, 5th graders?
Hold on a sec. There we go. So I had 2 questions. Did you or anyone get injured or hurt at all on the climb? Nina wants to know, and our friend Maya wants to know, was it loud because of all the wind once you got to those kind of altitude?
Oh, great question. 2 great questions. Yes. Injuries are kind of subjective. There's constantly people getting evacuated by helicopter from base camp or being helped down the mountain with different kinds of injuries, from frostbite to high altitude sickness and these kind of things. So there's quite a bit that happens throughout an Everest expedition. Then unfortunately also there's people that perish every year. That's just part of climbing Mount Everest, unfortunately. But on our team, yeah, we had, for example, one of our Sherpas got helicopter evacuated back to Kathmandu because of altitude sickness, and one of our cameramen also got helicopter evacuated back to Kathmandu as well because of altitude sickness. Now, injuries itself, physical injuries, I actually have permanent nerve damage on all 10 of my toes. I lost all 10 of my toenails on Mount Everest, and that came from the hundreds of thousands of strikes of my boot, specifically this boot, kicking into the ice day after day after day, that I did nerve damage to my toes. And I also lost 27 pounds of muscle mass during that climb. So, I left Colorado for Nepal at 197 pounds. And when I got back to Kathmandu 52 days after climbing the mountain, I was 170 pounds. So that mountain took 27 pounds of muscle mass from me. And that's because of multiple factors. Because of your digestive system shuts down at altitude, so you're not able to process a lot of calories, and then of course you're expending a tremendous amount of energy just to survive, as well as to try to climb up and down the mountain. So therefore I lost a lot of weight. And with regards to the wind noise, that depends on where you are in the mountain. Sometimes it was completely still, to the point that you could hear yourself think, where it was so eerily silent that you could almost hear your mind wandering, because your mind is constantly wandering because it's telling you you shouldn't be here. So you're constantly thinking and talking to yourself, essentially. But also there's times where it sounded like a jet engine. And at Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, when we were leaving for the summit at around midnight on our summit night, it was so loud. The wind was howling so strong, it sounded like standing in an airport and listening to a big jet engine roaring. So yeah, depending on where you are in the mountain and what time that you were at that place on the mountain, it could be completely silent to being extremely loud.
All right, let's get our 4th graders back in here for a follow-up. I see someone waiting patiently.
Amelia has a question here.
Was there a lot of pollution along the Everest climb?
That's a great question. You know, a lot less pollution nowadays than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. There's the organization that monitors the amount of pollution on Mount Everest is called the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee, and that's basically a park committee. So Mount Everest sits on the Nepal side, sits in Sagarmatha National Park, and then the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee is assigned to not only monitor the people that go to Mount Everest, and also the setting the route through the ice fall and all the way to the summit of Mount Everest, but also the pollution itself, the trash. And so what they've instilled over the last 10 to 15 years has been a pretty aggressive cleanup program on Mount Everest, not just bringing down the trash that you produce yourself on your expedition on Mount Everest, but also trash from previous years. So now you have climbers, essentially Sherpa teams, that will go up there, and their only job is to bring down trash from previous years. And a lot of that had to do with, for example, if there was a disaster like in 2014 when there was a big avalanche that killed 16 people, or in 2015 when there was a big earthquake that hit Nepal that shut down the climbing season. Well, what happens is if you go up on the mountain and you're setting up different camps and you're bringing up food and fuel and you're bringing up equipment, then all of a sudden the season ends because of a disaster. Well, all that stuff is left there until the next year. So whose responsibility is it to bring down that trash? Well, obviously it's not necessarily the climber from the next year to bring down trash from climbers of previous years. So what the SPCC, or the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee, has decided to do is to send teams up there to try to make up for previous amount of trash that was left on the mountain, going all the way back to many, many years. And they've done a great job of cleaning up the mountain, where now all the climbers that go up there are responsible for their own trash, but also to bring down additional weight as well as they come back down. So there's a lot less trash there than there used to be 15 years ago, but there's still some work that needs to be done.
All right. Thanks, Amelia. Great question. Let's dip to YouTube quickly. We've got a few questions here. This question's come up a few times, so I'm going to combine the question into how did you build up the courage to do this? And there must have been a time when you wanted just to turn around. So how did you push through that?
Yeah, great question. You know, the original courage was to honor my promise that I made when I was 14-year-old, sitting on that couch or leaning against that couch after a lengthy soccer practice. And I promised myself that one day I would climb that mountain. So I think that's where my courage came from, was to honor a promise to myself. Because like I said before, if I couldn't keep a promise to myself, how can I guarantee my promises to anyone else? So I think that's probably where I got the courage from. And my abilities of being able to climb mountains and learning more and more about climbing mountains and going to higher mountains during my journey to try to get to Mount Everest probably helped also seed that courage of that promise. With regards to, were there times I wanted to turn around? Yes. All the time. You're constantly lying to yourself, because there's no civilization that's ever lived above 17,000 feet. The reason why is because we can't stay above 17,000 feet indefinitely. You will ultimately die if you try to stay up there permanently, because the air is just too thin in order to survive. And so your body slowly breaks down, and ultimately you would die if you tried to stay there indefinitely. So your body is constantly screaming to yourself, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Turn around and go home. So what I did, and I guess what a lot of climbers do, is that you kind of look 50 feet or 5 feet or 10 feet in front of you, and you constantly just make these little tiny goals. Okay, now just get to that rock. Okay, then when you get to that rock, try to get to the next rock or the next little feature that you might see on the mountain, and you try to aim for that and then continue to go on once you make it from there. And so you're constantly almost convincing yourself to continue forward. Otherwise, yeah, the whole time you might be arguing with yourself about turning around.
All right. One more from YouTube, then we'll visit our North Bay crew, because I know they need a second chance. So Jacob from 7C would like to know what the temperature is like as you make your way to each camp.
Great question. And you know what I kind of come up with when it comes to Mount Everest is a freeze or fry scenario. The reason why is, let's say if the sun is out and it's completely still at Everest Base Camp or above Camp 1 and Camp 2, which sits in this big valley. You can see it behind me here. That's called the Western Coombe. And it's like a big back bowl. Like if people that are skiers will know this, or snowboarders that will know what a bowl is. And it's essentially because you have three really big mountains that create this bowl. And in that bowl, if the wind is still and the sun is out, it can be over 100 degrees on the heat index. So you are frying like an egg. It is extremely hot. But within a matter of 45 seconds, the clouds can come over and the wind can come in because Everest generates its own weather. And it can drop from 100 degrees of a heat index all the way down to 20, 0 degrees, or even below zero in less than 1 minute. So then you're freezing. So you're constantly shedding these layers, putting on these layers. And as you go higher up on the mountain, you're constantly unzipping this suit or zipping up this suit to bundle up more. So yeah, depending on where on the mountain, it can get very, very cold into the negative 30, 40 degrees, or it can feel as hot as 100 degrees, like you're sitting on the beach somewhere in the Caribbean.
All right. Let's grab our third and fourth graders in North Bay for our final question.
Hello, my name is Freya, and my question is, what type of food do you eat when you're climbing Mount Everest?
Oh, another great question. Well, if you're down at base camp, where we are at 17,500 feet for a majority of the climb, which is your staging point again to try to make your way up and down that mountain, the food is pretty good because you have yaks and you have helicopters and you have porters that have been for months delivering cargo to base camp before the climb actually starts. So you can have pizzas and you can have different kinds of food, even steaks or chicken or salads and rice and pasta and all these different things. So what base camp food is like is pretty good because, again, that also helps build your energy and your morale to have a positive attitude as you're working your way up the mountain, because you want to try to make it as comfortable as possible down at base camp. However, as you go higher and higher on the mountain, there's 4 camps as you go up on the mountain, the food becomes progressively smaller and worse, from carrying sandwiches to get to Camp 1 to just melting snow and putting it in a dehydrated bag of food, like a backpacker pantry kind of a thing. And you shake up the water to make the food, and then you just eat it with a spoon sitting in your tent, and that's what you have. And then on summit night, basically you're eating nothing. And what I had then were just some little block shots of energy and some water, and that's all I had for almost a course of 42 hours. So the higher you go, the less and less food that you will have and the less food that you'll eat, because your digestive system will also not process that anyway. So it's almost pointless to be able to eat anything the higher the mountain you go.
Cool.
All right, Freya, thanks for that great question. Alex, I think we're at, I saw someone pop up. We'll squeeze one more in.
Hello, my name is Carter.
Hi, Carter.
My question is, what's the most important part of your gear?
Ooh, that is a great question. I would have to say, ultimately, if there's one piece of gear that you have to have in order to climb Mount Everest, that would be these crampons, these little spikes on the bottom of the boots, because the whole mountain is snow, rock, and ice. So without that, you would have no traction. You wouldn't be able to climb the mountain. So as long as you have these attached to whatever footwear you wear, you give yourself at least a chance. Of course, there's other pieces of gear like this down suit that would be very important to have in order to stay warm. Gloves, which of course are mandatory so your hands don't freeze. This climbing harness right here that you put around your waist that has this little Jumar or ascender device that I mentioned earlier during our slideshow. That is a safety thing that would make it, very difficult to climb without that piece of equipment, but technically you could climb it. So I would say the most important piece of gear are these little spikes on the bottom of your boots known as crampons.
Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Carter. Okay, Alex, that was great. Thanks so much. Well, for a bunch of things. First of all, giving the students access to the film. So over the last couple of weeks, they've been able to tune in. I'd say somewhere between 60 to 70 classrooms took us up on that offer and have tuned in, which is awesome. And thank you for being with us today to answer some questions, give us a little behind the scenes look. And then we'll be grabbing you again at 1 Eastern to do this again with another group of classrooms.
Fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you and all these amazing classrooms around the United States and Canada. And it's a true honor to be able to share my Everest experience with you also. Thank you so much for listening and for your wonderful questions today.
All right. Well, we hope to see classrooms join us for the rest of the week. Tomorrow we'll be live from Canada's only research icebreaker. In about an hour, we'll be with my friend Joe Cutler live in Zambia on the river, looking at river biodiversity. So I just heard from him. They've caught a whole bunch of fish for us to check out from their camp. So that should be pretty cool. And classrooms, thank you so much. Let's get a few classrooms on camera if you want to get nice and loud. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for playing Kahoot. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone. We're going to sign off for now. All right, Alex.